This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India's presidency at UN Security Council. The participants are K.P. Fabian, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
India has been elected for a 2-year tenure as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council in January 2021, with the world in the grip of the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, and it is set to assume the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council in August. For this 1 month, it has a packed agenda of issues on which it would like to work, probably the most critical of which is pushing for a negotiated peace settlement in Afghanistan. There are also a host of other important issues on the UNSC agenda. Ambassador K.P. Fabian, why it is important for India to lead the world's highest collective decision-making body at this point of time?
It's a happy coincidence that India assumes the presidency in the month of its independence. Of course, India has been president earlier also. We have been on the Security Council from 1950-51 onwards, as many as 8 times. But what is important and what has been important in regard to India's presence at the Security Council is that India has endeavored to impart some balance. Balance because, the P5, as you know, are not always united. They have their interests. And there is also the veto power. Veto, which means I forbid. So that makes it difficult for the Security Council at times to act. But even when they act, the P5 try to push their own particular interests. That is one matter. Second is that the non-P5, they need to have a good sort of spokesperson for them, can articulate matters, who can engage with considerable patience, engage in drafting and all that. So India provides a bridge. So what emerges is something more focused, more forward-looking, and also, this is very important, sensitive to the situation on the ground.
Now, at this point of time, in your point of view, would be the most matter of critical importance? Would it be the issue of Afghanistan and the need for some kind of a peaceful resolution there? Or what other issues at this point do you think should be what India pushes for?
Well, Afghanistan is very important for the region, for the international community, and of course for Afghans, and very important for India too. So India will certainly focus attention on that. But it's one thing for India to sort of come up with, make a short list of issues it wants to focus on. But in the real world, Security Council issues come up. Issues are brought to Security Council depending on the situation, what is happening. After all, as we know, the primary responsibility of the Security Council is to maintain international peace and security. That is according to the Charter. But on the UN website, Security Council website, it lists 3 others. One, to develop friendly relations among nations. Next, to cooperate in solving international problems and in promoting respect for human rights. And the third one is to serve as a center for harmonizing actions of nations. Here, for example, COVID-19 can come. How do we harmonize the actions? Because the South is not getting enough vaccines. Some countries in the North have more vaccines than they need. So there is a very, wide-ranging agenda. And also I hear that perhaps from India, the foreign minister might be chairing 1 or 2 sessions. And the foreign secretary might also. I suppose that will depend on what the sessions are about. India is sort of deeply, keenly interested in what is happening in the Security Council, especially when it is chaired.
The Maldivian Foreign Minister Abdullah Shahid was here in India last week in his capacity as the President-elect of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, which the high-level segment of which begins in September. When Mr. Shahid visited India, he met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and they talked about issues that should be on the United Nations agenda, including, of course, a reform of some of the UN organs. Now, I understand and I know that the reform is not a part of the UN Security Council mandate. But, for example, Ambassador Tirumurthy, our permanent representative there, has said that it is time for the UN Security Council to take a holistic approach to the issue of maritime security that safeguards the common prosperity of all countries. Now, how can a country like India go about pursuing this kind of an issue? How is it taken forward, Ambassador? Because you would be familiar with the functioning of the organization.
Before answering that question, may I say a word about the present structure of the Security Council and of the need to sort of change it, if I may. See, what happened was that it was President Roosevelt who had this idea of having another international organization to succeed the League of Nations. And his idea was that in the global village, we need some policemen. That means the rest of the population should be disarmed. He started with 4 policemen, that is United States, United Kingdom, USSR, and China. Well, when it came to Churchill, he was scandalized that China should be there, but being very clever, a negotiator, he said that he would agree to China provided Roosevelt brings in France, which was, getting liberated at that time. When it came to Stalin, he was more than scandalized that, and quoting his own word, an Asiatic power should be sitting in judgment upon us Europeans. But finally he agreed, but then there was a little bit of quid pro quo and the veto came into force. That is, Stalin was scared, and I suppose reasonably scared, that the United States will have such overwhelming support both in the General Assembly and in the Security Council that USSR will be forced into situations not to its advantage. That is why it came. Now, that was a structure. Perhaps it was good enough post-1945 for a couple of years. But after decolonization and after the collapse of the Cold War, this structure needs to be changed. But anyway, as you yourself said, it is perhaps not at the Security Council for action in that direction will be taken for provisions in the Charter. Coming to maritime security is important for all countries. And what is required is the seaborne trade should be able to go without any problem. Comes to military ships and armed military ships, it's a different matter. Now, what we have witnessed is that as regards the South China Sea, People's Republic of China has extended its control and occupation beyond the lines sanctioned by the UNCLOS, that is United Nations Law on the Sea Convention. And as you know, the other day, America sent a ship there. So we have a problem. We have to make sure that the Indo-Pacific should remain under nobody's control, but it should be a zone of peace and for peaceful commerce and for cooperation. Because what India has in mind in Indo-Pacific is not ganging up against anyone, confrontation with anyone. No, it is cooperation with everyone. And if there are obstacles to that cooperation, well, they should be removed as best as possible. So the Security Council is certainly a forum where this can be discussed, but sound a word of caution that because China and Russia, as I mentioned, are veto-wielding powers, we should not expect immediate progress.
Ambassador Tirumurthy has also spoken of saving Africa from sanctions, for example. That is the other thing that dominates the Security Council at this point. What exactly, for example, in West Asia, in the Middle East, we have leveraged our strong and historical links to convey our views on Palestine, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Now, there are tensions and conflicts in all of these countries that he has mentioned. What exactly, according to you, Ambassador, should India try and push for on this particular agenda?
As regards Africa, India and Kenya voted against a resolution for continuing the sanctions on South Sudan just 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Only India and Kenya. So let me put it this way, that there is a tendency on the part of the international community led by the West and at times not resisted by the non-West among the P5 to use sanctions as a remedy for everything. You impose sanctions and you expect things to sort of fall in place. And if they don't fall in place, what do? You continue with the sanctions. Something is wrong with this sanctions-obsessed approach. As you know, in the case of Iraq, how many hundreds of thousands of Iraqis suffered because of sanctions, because somebody was looking for weapons of mass destruction, which ultimately were not there. So sanctions have been misused or abused. So India's efforts to make sure that the African countries which get into this trouble are given relief. That's very, very important. Now, coming to the second part, we all know what is happening, say, in Yemen, for example. There, I think there is scope for progress because what is happening is that there is almost a military stalemate between the Houthis and the Saudi Arabia-led coalition. In fact, I said almost because actually the Houthis are making incremental gains. So it's not exactly a stalemate. And in Saudi Arabia also there is a reckoning that this war they started in, recall, March 2015, chasing what I call a mirage of military victory. It was Operation Decisive Storm, as they called it. So I think it should be possible for clever diplomacy to find a set of words acceptable to both the Houthis and Saudi Arabia to have some sort of ceasefire. Of course, Iran comes in there because Iran supports the Houthis, not so much by way of arms, but morally and otherwise. So unless there is a little bit of move towards rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and I choose my words very carefully, a move, not final completion. Unless there is a move towards rapprochement, we will not get a ceasefire in Yemen. So that is important. The other day, the Syrian forces under Bashar al-Assad, they have started bombing, and about 40,000, more than that, people are in danger. There, of course, Russia is very difficult. They wanted only one line for humanitarian, only one corridor and all that. There again, something should be possible to make progress. Then, what else is happening in that area? West Asia?
Palestine, West Asia.
Palestine.
Yes.
Palestine. It's like this. We have a new government in Israel, and I think it was necessary to have a new government because he was conducting policy with a huge accent on personal survival. So the national interest gets conflated with individual interest. And as we know, the Arab or rather Palestine political parties supporting from outside the government. But I do not expect any move towards settlement and all that. But what we can hope to expect is in regard to new settlements and things like that, in regard to the treatment of Palestinians and all that, there could be some progress. But then, as we know, the Palestinians themselves are deeply divided.
So very interesting times ahead, Ambassador, and the fact that how much of the Security Council's mandate actually reaches where it ought to. There are a lot of other items on the agenda that Ambassador Tirumurti has outlined, but I think we've run quite out of time today in this very interesting discussion, especially the parts that you spoke about, West Asia and the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Fabian.
Thank you so much.
You were listening to a discussion on India's presidency at UN Security Council. The participants were K.P. Fabian, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.